Darius Matthews had always known that life sometimes served up more than one could expect, but as he stepped onto the luxurious cabin of Skylux Airlines that day, he had no idea just how tumultuous his journey was about to become. The day had begun like any other for him, a 42-year-old self-made CEO of Right Tech Solutions who had risen from the tough streets of South Chicago to command a multi-billion-dollar tech company. Yet the polished veneer of first-class travel quickly revealed a seething undercurrent of prejudice and corruption that would shake everyone on board to their core. As Darius settled into his carefully chosen seat 2A, selected for its ample 42 inches of legroom which he needed to work during the flight, he noticed a ripple of tension in the cabin that belied the usual calm of a luxury flight. A flight attendant named Jessica spoke up in a tone that was superficially polite yet dripping with condescension. She explained, "There seems to be a mistake, sir. We need you to move to accommodate our VIP passenger. This seat is reserved for only our platinum members." Even though her words were coated with courtesy, there was a clear insinuation that Darius did not belong. Behind her, Karen Whitfield, an elegantly dressed white woman with designer accessories and an air of entitlement, tapped her expensive watch impatiently. Her eyes darted between Darius and the seat he occupied, as if silently calculating that his very presence was an affront to her usual comfort. "I always sit there. It's practically my seat," Karen declared in a low, almost dismissive tone, meant for everyone nearby to hear. The accusation hung in the air, igniting a spark of indignation in Darius's heart. Darius had done everything by the book. He had booked his flight early, paid in full, and his platinum membership card, which he calmly produced without a hint of embarrassment, confirmed his right to be there. Yet, despite his impeccable record and impressive credentials, the flight attendant's smile tightened as if to conceal her inner judgment. "I understand, sir, but this particular seat is typically reserved for a better customer," she explained, her eyes shifting toward Karen, who stood with the confidence of someone used to being deferred to. For Darius, every word felt like a carefully aimed barb, a reminder that, despite his success, his skin color still marked him as an outsider in the eyes of those who wielded power in this gilded world. Around him, passengers began to take notice. Mobile phones slowly emerged as whispers and furtive glances swept through the cabin. Unbeknownst to the crew, what began as a seemingly trivial seating dispute would soon become a battleground for justice, a vivid example of how karma often arrives unannounced, especially when the downtrodden refused to be silenced. Darius, who had long mastered the art of calm resilience in the face of adversity, felt a familiar mixture of weariness and determination. His mind flashed back to his early years in South Chicago, where he taught himself to code on a battered second-hand computer and where the sting of racial prejudice was a constant companion. Every hardship, including the tragic loss of his father in a senseless act of violence when Darius was only 16, had steeled him for moments like this. Earlier that day, security cameras had captured a different, gentler side of him. Darius had been seen helping an elderly woman who struggled with her luggage, patiently guiding her to her gate, holding open doors and tipping generously at the airport cafe. Not because he expected gratitude, but because his nature compelled him to show kindness regardless of the circumstance. This inherent decency, however, seemed to clash violently with the greed and prejudice that now reared its ugly head before him. He had boarded Skylux Airlines to deliver the keynote address at the Global Ethics and Technology Conference, a moment that was supposed to celebrate his innovations in combating bias in customer service. The irony was not lost on him. Here he was, embodying all that his company stood for, yet being subjected to blatant discrimination by those who should have upheld the highest standards of courtesy and respect. The first-class cabin of Skylux Airlines was designed to be a sanctuary of luxury and comfort, where heated towels, sparkling glasses of champagne, and seats that transformed into full beds promised an experience akin to a five-star resort in the sky. Behind this polished exterior, however, lay an institution desperate to modernize its outdated systems and salvage a reputation that had been tarnished by complacency and indifference. The airline was on the verge of sealing a partnership with a major tech company to revolutionize its operations, a deal for which they were willing to compromise even their basic values. Unbeknownst to the passengers, the very seat that Darius occupied held a secret significance. It was the same seat reserved for Karen Whitfield, a longtime regular whose lavish tips and unwavering entitlement had secured her unchallenged status among Skylux Platinum members. Jessica, who had faithfully served Skylux for 8 years, was caught in a moral quandary. She prided herself on memorizing the preferences of regular passengers, and Karen's privileged status meant that her seat was non-negotiable. With bills to pay and the pressure of a system that rewarded conformity over fairness, Jessica had felt compelled to enforce an arbitrary rule that dismissed Darius's rightful claim. As she leaned toward him and asked if he would mind moving to another seat, a suggestion thinly veiled as courtesy, Darius responded with a quiet firmness that betrayed neither anger nor fear. "I'm sorry, but this is my assigned seat," he said, his voice steady even as the undercurrent of injustice made every word resonate with quiet defiance. The situation escalated rapidly. A fellow passenger, emboldened by Karen's theatrics, whispered a thinly veiled threat. "Sir, we can do this the easy way, or we can make this difficult. Your choice." In that moment, the entire cabin held its breath, aware that they were witnessing not just a minor seating dispute, but an event that encapsulated the deep-seated divisions of society. Darius's calm gaze met that of Trevor, the cabin supervisor, whose rigid posture and condescending tone underscored an unyielding adherence to outdated notions of privilege. "I have shown my boarding pass and platinum status," Darius reiterated, a subtle defiance underlying his every word as he stood his ground in the face of blatant discrimination. The tension was further fueled by an act of underhanded bribery. As Karen pretended to retrieve her bag from the overhead compartment, she discreetly slid a folded stack of notes into Jessica's pocket. The exchange was barely audible, but not unnoticed, and the sense of betrayal among the onlooking passengers was palpable. It was a silent acknowledgement that the seating arrangement was less about customer preference and more about favoring those with wealth and influence, irrespective of fairness or decency. Even as the whispers spread like wildfire through the cabin, Darius's dignified resolve only deepened. He had endured enough in his life to know that sometimes the most unyielding adversaries were not those with physical might, but those who abused the power of prejudice. In that moment, every passenger on board became a silent witness to an injustice that was far greater than a mere dispute over a seat. The air in the cabin grew heavy with anticipation and disquiet. Cameras began to record the unfolding drama, and it was clear that what happened next would soon find its way onto social media, igniting debates about racism, corporate corruption, and the true meaning of customer service in America today. The subtle interplay of glances, whispered comments, and the heavy silence that fell over the first-class cabin spoke volumes about a society divided by old prejudices that still festered beneath the surface of modern life. As the minutes ticked by, the confrontation began to take on a life of its own. Trevor, still reeling from his earlier attempt to force Darius from his rightful seat, adjusted his uniform tie and strode toward the front of the cabin to make another call on the service phone. His actions, intended to reinforce the authority of the airline, only further inflamed the situation. Darius's heart pounded not with anger but with a profound sadness. A sadness born from years of witnessing society's failure to recognize the true worth of a man. His journey, marked by early mornings, filled with the glow of a second-hand computer screen and long nights of relentless coding in a cramped apartment, had led him to this moment. A moment when his resilience was tested by the petty cruelty of those who believed themselves superior merely because of the color of his skin. The captain, James Reynolds, soon emerged from the cockpit, his weathered face bearing the marks of countless flights and countless confrontations. He moved with an air of practiced authority that demanded obedience, yet even his presence could not immediately dispel the storm of emotions that swirled in the cabin. With a measured tone, he joined Trevor by Darius's seat, signaling that this dispute had now escalated beyond a simple mix-up of seating preferences. The once relaxed atmosphere of first class was now charged with an almost tangible sense of impending reckoning. Every detail of the scene, from the glimmer of expensive jewelry on Karen's wrist to the forced politeness of Jessica's smile, painted a stark picture of a society where power and privilege still dictated the rules. Darius Matthews, a man who had achieved more than most could ever dream of despite being born into a world that often sought to hold him back, now stood as the embodiment of every struggle against discrimination. His eyes, calm and unwavering, conveyed a quiet promise that the injustice he faced would not go unanswered. It was as if, deep within him, a fire had been ignited, a fire fueled by decades of silent suffering and a resolve to reclaim dignity in a world that had long denied him his due. As the confrontation deepened, the seeds of retribution were quietly being sown. Darius's silence was not one of submission, but of calculated composure, a calm before a storm that promised to reshape the lives of everyone involved. The subtle threat in Trevor's voice, the furtive glances exchanged between crew members, and the palpable tension in the air all hinted at an inevitable showdown. Darius's refusal to yield was a spark that would soon ignite a larger conflagration, one that would expose the rotten underbelly of Skylux Airlines and force those who had once taken their power for granted to reckon with the consequences of their prejudice. It is moments like these that remind us how deeply the scars of discrimination run in our society. Darius Matthews, with his humble beginnings, his relentless determination, and his unwavering belief in the inherent dignity of every human being, had become an inadvertent symbol of hope for countless others who had been marginalized and mistreated. His calm yet resolute stance in the face of overt racism and systemic corruption stirred a deep sense of compassion and admiration among those who witnessed the event, even if only from afar. For many, his struggle was a poignant reminder that even in a world obsessed with appearances and superficial markers of status, true character and integrity remain the most potent forces for change. At that moment, the seeds of an extraordinary response were taking root. Although Darius had not yet unleashed the full measure of his retribution, there was a charged anticipation that something monumental was about to unfold. His experience on Skylux Airlines was not destined to be a quiet moment of defiance. It was the prelude to a grand act of retribution that would not only upend the established order on that flight, but also send shockwaves throughout an entire industry. The quiet resolve in his eyes promised that when the time came, the response would be both spectacular and just. A response that would leave onlookers exclaiming in awe and vindication. In the midst of the chaos, every whispered comment and every sympathetic glance from fellow passengers added layers to the story. A story of a man who, despite facing a barrage of racism and entitlement, refused to let injustice triumph. As Captain Reynolds conferred with Trevor near Darius's seat, it became increasingly clear that the incident was no longer just about a disputed seat or a misplaced VIP privilege. It was about challenging an entire system built on inequality and exploitation, about standing up for the truth that every individual deserves respect regardless of their background. Darius Matthews' journey that day was a collision of worlds, one where the promise of American luxury and technological advancement clashed with the stubborn remnants of an old and unjust social order. His every step, every measured word, and every quiet act of resistance spoke to a lifetime spent overcoming obstacles and defying expectations. And though the bribes, the sneers, and the subtle threats had left him battered in spirit, they also served to galvanize a determination that would soon culminate in a reckoning so grand that it would force even the most hardened skeptics to pause and reconsider what justice truly meant. By the time the captain's authoritative voice resonated through the cabin, the stage was set for a dramatic transformation. Darius, a man who had built his empire on the promise of fairness and innovation, now faced a personal trial that would test every ounce of his fortitude. The corridors of Skylux Airlines, with their gilded decor and extravagant amenities, had become the unlikely arena for a moral battle that reached far beyond a mere seating arrangement. And as the first-class cabin buzzed with hushed conversations and furtive glances, it was evident that what was unfolding was the genesis of a revolution, one that would soon challenge the very foundations of discrimination and entitlement. Little did the crew of Skylux Airlines know that in the quiet resolve of a man who had weathered so many storms lay the seeds of a spectacular comeback. In the days that would follow, whispers of his courage and hints of a grand counterattack would circulate widely, capturing the imagination of people far beyond the confines of that turbulent flight. And for those who had witnessed the struggle firsthand, the memory of that day would remain a poignant reminder that even in the face of deeply entrenched injustice, the human spirit can rise, resilient and unyielding, to reclaim what is rightfully deserved. This was only the beginning of a saga that would evolve into something truly unforgettable. Darius Matthews, with his dignified composure and compassionate heart, had already made a stand that resonated with the silent voices of those who had long been marginalized. The unfolding drama was destined to reach a crescendo, where every act of cruelty would be met with a counterstrike of equal magnitude, a response so grand that it would leave even the most cynical observers in a state of awe. And as the Skylux crew scrambled to maintain their fragile hold on authority, the world beyond that first-class cabin was poised to bear witness to an act of retribution that would forever change the narrative of discrimination in America. In that fateful moment, as the tension in the cabin reached its peak and the eyes of every passenger were fixed on the unfolding conflict, Darius Matthews stood as a beacon of resilience and hope. His story, marked by the harsh realities of racial injustice and the bitter taste of betrayal, was about to take a turn that would not only vindicate his suffering, but also serve as a powerful reminder that true dignity cannot be stolen by those who wield power unjustly. For every kind word he had offered to strangers, for every humble gesture of kindness, was now the foundation upon which he would build a counteraction so monumental that it would reverberate far beyond the confines of a single flight. As the cabin settled into a heavy silence, punctuated only by the soft hum of the aircraft engines, every heart in that room began to beat in unison with the promise of impending justice. Darius Matthews, whose life had been an endless series of battles against overwhelming odds, now prepared himself for the next phase of his journey, a phase in which the forces of discrimination would finally meet the unyielding strength of a man who had long refused to be diminished. And though the path ahead was fraught with uncertainty and danger, his determination shone brightly as a guiding light, promising that the day of reckoning was not far away. In that defining moment aboard Skylux Airlines, the conflict had grown from a mere dispute over a seating arrangement into an epic struggle between the forces of entrenched prejudice and the unwavering spirit of a man who believed in fairness and equality above all else. Every whispered remark, every sideways glance, and every act of covert bribery had only served to deepen the chasm between those who clung to outdated notions of superiority and a new era of accountability and respect. And as Darius Matthews continued to sit resolutely in his rightful place, the stage was set for a grand counterattack that would leave onlookers amazed and ultimately reshape the very fabric of how dignity and justice were upheld in the world of high-flying privilege. The events of that day, though still unfolding, carried within them the seeds of an extraordinary transformation. Darius's calm determination and quiet defiance would soon serve as the catalyst for a response so magnificent and all-encompassing that it would force every passenger, crew member, and even those who had initially supported the discriminatory practices to confront the consequences of their actions. And for the many compassionate souls who had borne witness, particularly those with gentle hearts and years of wisdom reminiscent of a life well lived, The hope was that this stand against injustice would mark the beginning of a long overdue change, a change that would finally allow every human being, regardless of their background, to be seen and valued for who they truly were. In the gentle murmur of the airplane cabin, amid the hushed conversations and tentative glances exchanged by those who understood the gravity of what was unfolding, Darius Matthews' silent vow resonated like a promise. To all who had suffered at the hands of discrimination, it was a vow that the cruelty of that moment would not be allowed to define the future, but would instead be transformed into a powerful reminder that justice, when pursued with unwavering determination, could bring about a revolution that was both majestic and deeply cathartic. And so, as the flight continued its journey through the vast American skies, the stage was set for a saga of retribution and redemption that would echo far beyond the confines of that first-class cabin. Darius Matthews, a man whose life story was as inspiring as it was tragic, had planted the seeds for a response so bold and transformative that it promised to turn the tide against those who had long abused their power. The injustice of that day was not merely an isolated incident. It was the spark that would ignite a movement, a grand chapter in a story of resistance that would leave even the most hardened skeptics marveling at the triumph of the human spirit. As the aircraft soared over sprawling cities and endless highways, every minute detail of that turbulent encounter, the condescending words, the surreptitious bribe, the hushed threats, and the steadfast resolve of one man, would eventually become a symbol of hope for the many who had been oppressed. It was a reminder that while cruelty may thrive in the shadows of outdated traditions, the light of dignity and fairness was powerful enough to banish even the darkest prejudices. For Darius Matthews, this was not just a battle for a seat. It was a battle for the very soul of a nation yearning for justice. By the time the captain's authoritative intervention signaled a temporary lull in the unfolding chaos, every passenger in that cabin had witnessed a moment that transcended the ordinary. It was a moment that, for many, would serve as a turning point. A moment when the oppressed found a voice, and the perpetrators of discrimination were forced to confront the full measure of their cruelty. And as Darius Matthews maintained his unyielding stance, a quiet promise of a magnificent retribution loomed on the horizon, one that would soon captivate hearts and inspire a generation to stand up for what was right. In the echo of every whispered comment and every furtive camera flash, the truth was clear. The era of unchallenged privilege was drawing to a close. Darius Matthews, with his gentle strength and unshakable resolve, had not only claimed his rightful place on that flight, but had also set in motion a series of events that would ultimately redefine the battle between prejudice and progress. His journey, marked by relentless perseverance and punctuated by moments of profound kindness, was about to culminate in a response that would be as dazzling as it was just. A response that promised to transform every painful memory of discrimination into a resounding declaration of dignity and retribution. And so, as Skylux Airlines continued its flight across the expansive skies of America, the echoes of that fateful confrontation reverberated through the cabin like a prelude to an extraordinary transformation. For Darius Matthews, whose life had been an endless journey of overcoming obstacles and defying injustice, this moment was both a culmination and a new beginning, a spark that would soon ignite a revolutionary act of retribution destined to leave even the most skeptical observers in awe. The stage was set for a dramatic turnaround, one that would not only vindicate his own suffering, but also serve as a rallying cry for all those who had ever been made to feel less than human. In that charged atmosphere, with every detail etched into the minds of those who witnessed the injustice, from the sneering entitlement of Karen Whitfield to the obsequious compliance of those enforcing outdated rules, the promise of a grand and decisive counterstrike began to take shape. Darius Matthews' steady gaze, his quiet but unyielding refusal to be cowed by cruelty, was a testament to the strength of his character and a sign that the forces of retribution were gathering momentum. Even as the cabin settled into a brief, uneasy calm, the winds of change had already begun to stir, heralding a new era where injustice would be met with an answer so powerful that it left onlookers breathless with amazement and admiration. By the time the service phone was set aside and the captain's intervention signaled that the flight had reached a temporary impasse, every soul on board recognized that they had borne witness to something extraordinary, a moment of defiance that would soon transform into a magnificent act of redemption. Darius Matthews, a man whose entire life had been a series of battles against the odds, had, in that moment, set the stage for a retribution that promised not just to restore his own dignity, but to ignite a movement that would challenge the very foundations of discrimination in modern America. The quiet determination of Darius Matthews, as he sat resolutely in his rightful seat, the promise of a grand retribution, one that would redefine the very nature of justice, glimmered with a quiet intensity. The events of that day were not just about a simple dispute over a first-class seat on Skylux Airlines. They were about challenging the deep-seated prejudices that had long divided people, about showing that every act of discrimination could be met with an act of resistance so powerful that it transformed the pain of the past into a beacon for the future. And though the full extent of what was to come remained shrouded in uncertainty, one thing was unmistakably clear. Darius Matthews had lit a spark that would soon set the stage for an unforgettable, resounding victory over injustice. As the aircraft cruised through the vast open skies, the tale of that fateful encounter would ripple outward, carrying with it the hopes of a better, fairer tomorrow. In the hearts of all who witnessed it, the memory of that day would serve as a constant reminder that even in the midst of cruelty and corruption, there remains the possibility of redemption. A possibility that, when nurtured with courage and conviction, can culminate in a response so magnificent, so all-encompassing, that it leaves everyone in a state of astonished delight. And for Darius Matthews, whose every step had been a testament to the triumph of perseverance over prejudice, the journey ahead promised not just personal vindication, but a grand, awe-inspiring reclamation of justice itself. Darius Matthews sat firmly in his assigned first-class seat, the same seat he had carefully chosen for its extra 42 inches of legroom that allowed him to work comfortably during the long flight. Moments later, the calm in the cabin was shattered as Captain James Reynolds stepped forward with a measured yet firm tone. "I understand there's a situation," the captain announced, his voice echoing off the polished walls of the cabin. 3 airline employees now surrounded Darius, their presence a stark reminder of the power imbalance that had suddenly come into focus. Despite being encircled, Darius maintained his composure. In his deep, steady voice, he replied, "Captain, with all due respect, I have a confirmed seat assignment and platinum status. I selected this specific seat for the extra legroom I need to work during the flight, and there is no policy that requires me to surrender my seat to someone who merely prefers it." The captain's words, intended to restore order, fell on deaf ears as Trevor, one of the crew members, allowed a smirk to creep across his face. It was the expression of a man who believed he held all the cards. "Sir, if you continue to refuse, we will have no choice but to remove you from the flight," Trevor declared, his tone laden with a threat that landed like a physical blow. Darius's eyebrows rose ever so slightly, a brief flash of genuine surprise breaking through his otherwise unwavering calm. "Are you threatening to remove me because I won't give up the seat I paid for?" he asked, his voice carrying a mix of disbelief and quiet defiance that rippled through the cabin. Before the captain could interject, a dramatic voice rang out from behind them. It was Karen Whitfield, a regularly privileged passenger whose entitlement was well known among the crew. "This is ridiculous," she exclaimed loudly enough for everyone to hear, her voice rising in a manner that bordered on theatrical. "I'm going to miss my connection, and I have never been treated this poorly in all my years of flying." Her words, dripping with self-importance, only fanned the flames of tension as several passengers exchanged looks of disbelief and dismay. The situation escalated quickly. With an air of finality, the captain delivered his ultimatum. "This is your final warning. Move to another seat or we will call security." It was at this pivotal moment that Darius, undeterred by the threat, slowly reached into his tailored navy jacket pocket and withdrew his smartphone. With deliberate care, he opened his camera app and began recording the unfolding scene. His measured action was a quiet declaration that he would not allow this injustice to pass without documentation. "I want to be clear," Darius stated in a calm yet resolute tone as his phone continued to capture every nuance of the confrontation. "I am simply documenting this interaction for my own protection." The tension mounted even further when Trevor's face contorted with anger. He lunged his hand toward Darius's phone as if to seize it, his actions leaving no room for ambiguity regarding his intent to control the situation by force. Yet Darius, quick and composed, pulled his phone back just in time. "Actually," he said steadily, "there is no federal law prohibiting recording on an aircraft unless it interferes with crew duties." His words, laced with legal certainty, caught Trevor off guard. The man's expression darkened further, his anger now mingling with frustration at being challenged by a man who was simply exercising his rights. The atmosphere in the cabin grew electric as the heavy footsteps of two airport security officers echoed down the aisle. They moved with practiced efficiency, following the accusatory gestures of Trevor as they zeroed in on Darius's seat. All attention was now focused on the confrontation unfolding before their eyes. Despite the mounting humiliation and the palpable sense of injustice, Darius remained seated with an air of dignified calm. His posture was erect, his gaze steady, and his phone, still recording, served as an unyielding witness to the events as they transpired. One of the security officers, his tone formal and measured, addressed Darius. "Sir, we have been informed that there is a situation requiring your removal from the aircraft." In response, Darius nodded once, a gesture of clear understanding, and then inquired in a clear, measured voice, "I would like to understand the specific airline policy I am violating. I am sitting in my assigned seat with a valid boarding pass and platinum status." His question, delivered without any hint of hostility, cut through the pretense of authority that had been paraded before him. The security officers exchanged uncomfortable glances as it became increasingly apparent that they had been called to remove a passenger who had broken no rules. One of them, struggling to find a coherent answer, eventually stated in a murmur, "You are being removed for creating a disturbance." The murmur, which rippled through the cabin, sent a shudder of disbelief among the passengers. An elderly gentleman in the second row shook his head in confirmation, and a young woman near the back of first class wiped tears from her eyes at the injustice unfolding before them. With quiet dignity, Darius began gathering his belongings. He closed his sleek tablet case, carefully tucked his presentation notes into his leather briefcase, and stood slowly, every movement measured and dignified. Meanwhile, Karen Whitfield, her face contorted into a smug expression of self-satisfaction, watched as Darius was forcibly escorted from his seat. In her eyes, this was a victory, a confirmation of her long-held belief that he clearly did not belong in a place reserved for people of her class and demeanor. As Darius passed by Trevor, an incident occurred that would later become a key piece of evidence in exposing the corruption and discrimination at play. Karen, thinking herself unobserved, slipped another folded bill into Trevor's pocket. In a hushed tone barely audible over the murmurs of the passengers, she said, "Thanks for handling the passengers and recording phones. First class should have standards." Her words, laced with disdain and entitlement, hung in the air like a poisonous cloud, a blatant act of bribery that underscored the systemic abuse of power. Once outside the plane, as Darius was escorted off by the security officers, he managed to pull out his phone once more. His fingers moved deftly across the screen as he composed a text message to his trusted chief operating officer, Elise. "I was removed from the plane, but they picked the wrong person to humiliate," he wrote. his message clear and resolute. Most would have been flustered, embarrassed, or even enraged after such an experience. But Darius exhibited a calm that came from years of navigating these treacherous waters. He then spoke into his phone in a low, firm voice. "Sarah, it's Darius. I need you to assemble the legal team immediately." His words were like a battle cry, a quiet promise that this injustice would not go unanswered. Inside the aircraft, the atmosphere among the remaining passengers was one of shock and dismay. A young officer, reviewing the incident report on his tablet, wore an expression of growing concern as he scrolled through the details. The gravity of the situation was slowly dawning on everyone aboard, and it was becoming painfully clear that a misunderstanding had been used as a pretext to enforce a discriminatory policy. One of the officers approached Darius hesitantly, saying, "Sir, I believe there may have been a misunderstanding." But Darius, his voice as steady as ever, responded, "There was indeed a misunderstanding, but not on my part. I was sitting in my assigned seat with a valid boarding pass when I was asked to move for another passenger's preference." His words cut through the tension like a knife, laying bare the truth for all to see. In that charged moment, as Darius resumed documenting every nuance of the unfolding incident with his phone, a young woman approached him. Clutching her carry-on bag in one hand and her own smartphone in the other, she spoke hesitantly, "Excuse me, sir." Her voice was tinged with indignation and compassion, a rare combination that immediately drew Darius's attention. "I followed you off the plane to be there and witness what was happening," she continued. "I recorded everything from the moment the flight attendant first approached you until they forced you off the plane." With trembling hands, she held up her phone and showed him a video, a clear, unobstructed recording of not only his removal from the aircraft, but also the damning moment when Karen slipped money into Trevor's pocket. "This is clearly discrimination," she said softly, her eyes welling up with tears as she spoke. Darius's expression softened for the first time since the ordeal began, and he offered her a grateful nod. "Thank you," he said sincerely, recognizing the significance of her evidence. They quickly exchanged contact information, and she promised to send him the full, unedited video immediately and to testify if needed. Little did she know that her recording would soon be viewed by millions and become the catalyst for a public reckoning. Back on board the aircraft, the scene had taken another dramatic turn. Karen Whitfield had nonchalantly settled into the seat that Darius had so rightfully occupied, her face radiating smug satisfaction. Jessica, the flight attendant who had played her part in this injustice, approached her with a contrite tone. "I'm so sorry for the disruption, Miss Whitfield," Jessica said, offering a complimentary glass of champagne in an almost rehearsed display of deference. "We want to ensure the rest of your flight is perfect." The scripted apology, however, rang hollow in the wake of the blatant discrimination that had unfolded. In the galley, a man discreetly slipped a $200 bill into Trevor's wallet, the very same sum that had been accepted to humiliate a man whose only offense was occupying the seat he had purchased. "Nice bonus today," Trevor murmured, tucking the money away as if it were a small token of appreciation for his cruelty. His tone betrayed nothing of the moral cost of his actions. Unbeknownst to the crew, an emergency call was coming through that would set off a chain of events far beyond the confines of that single flight. The airline's administrative team had just contacted the crew, warning them that they had made a grave mistake, one that could very well cost them their jobs. Frightened, the three employees exchanged anxious glances, trying desperately to understand the magnitude of what was unfolding. Meanwhile, in the sleek, glass-walled headquarters of Skylux Airlines, the CEO, Richard Williams, was reviewing quarterly projections when his phone rang with an urgent internal call from the Public Relations Department. "Sir, we may have a serious situation developing," the PR director said, his voice edged with panic. "A video is going viral." Williams listened intently as the director continued, explaining that this was not an ordinary case of disruptive behavior, but a case where a black man in first class who refused to give up his assigned seat to a white woman was being removed from the flight. The video showed clearly that the staff had accepted cash from that woman without any hesitation. As Williams watched the footage on his monitor, his expression shifted rapidly from concern to horror. "Who is he?" he demanded, his voice barely above a whisper when the response came back. "According to the manifest, his name is Darius Matthews." Williams's voice trailed off as the weight of the revelation sunk in. The name resonated deeply, a name that carried the legacy of struggle and quiet triumph over relentless adversity. For a long, heavy moment, the room fell silent as the CEO sat back in his chair, staring blankly at the screen, realizing that the foundations of Skylux Airlines were shaking under the force of a scandal that threatened to expose decades of ingrained discrimination. Throughout this tumultuous series of events, Darius Matthews had maintained a dignity that belied the injustice he was enduring. Each step he took, each word he spoke, was measured and deliberate, a testament to a life that had been built on overcoming hardship and rising above prejudice. His calm, unwavering resolve in the face of such blatant discrimination and cruelty evoked deep sympathy from onlookers, particularly those who had long witnessed the slow, insidious erosion of fairness in society. The incident was no longer just about a disputed seat. It had become a powerful symbol of the ongoing struggle against a system that privileged entitlement over decency and respect. For many passengers aboard that flight, especially those seasoned by decades of life's ups and downs, Darius's plight stirred memories of their own battles against injustice. His experience was a painful reminder of the times when prejudice reared its ugly head, yet it also kindled a hope that one day the scales of justice would finally tip in favor of those who had been wronged. As the aircraft continued its journey over the vast American landscape, every detail, from the whispered threats and surreptitious bribery to the quiet recording of every humiliating moment, was destined to become part of a larger narrative. A narrative that would capture the hearts of many, especially those who had spent their lives advocating for fairness and dignity. In the aftermath of that fateful encounter, as news of the viral video began to spread like wildfire, the fallout was swift and merciless. Richard Williams and his executive team scrambled to contain the damage, but it was too late. The public had seen the undeniable evidence of a system steeped in discrimination and corruption. Social media exploded with outrage, and calls for accountability echoed across the nation. Women in their golden years who had witnessed decades of change and yet still longed for a world where respect and decency were not luxuries but fundamental rights, found themselves particularly moved by Darius's story. They saw in him a reflection of their own quiet struggles and the determination to stand up for what was right, no matter the cost. As the scandal deepened, the narrative of that single flight became a rallying cry for justice. Darius Matthews, who had once been forced off a plane simply for occupying his rightful seat, was now emerging as an unexpected symbol of resistance against racial prejudice and corporate greed. His calm demeanor under fire, his willingness to document every detail of the encounter, and his prompt action in calling for legal support transformed his personal ordeal into a public outcry. The evidence collected by him and the brave young woman who had recorded every moment not only exposed the injustice, but also set in motion a series of events that would ultimately demand accountability from those who had abused their power. The story of Darius Matthews resonated far beyond the confines of that ill-fated flight. It served as a stark reminder that discrimination in all its forms could no longer be tolerated in a society that prided itself on fairness and equal opportunity. As the details of the incident unfolded on television screens and in print, it became clear that this was more than a simple case of mistaken seating arrangements. It was a deliberate act of dehumanization, one orchestrated by individuals who believed that their wealth and status granted them the right to trample on the dignity of others without consequence. In the days that followed, as legal teams were assembled and public outcry mounted, the repercussions for Skylux Airlines were swift and severe. The internal emergency meeting that had been called in the midst of the scandal turned into a full-blown investigation into discriminatory practices within the company. High-ranking officials were questioned, and several long-standing employees found themselves at the center of a public relations nightmare that threatened not only their careers, but the very future of the airline. For Darius Matthews, however, the ordeal had taken on a bittersweet note. While the injustice he had suffered had been deeply painful, it also ignited a determination within him to ensure that no one else would have to endure such humiliation in the future. Darius's experience became a turning point, a moment when the collective conscience of the nation was forced to confront the reality of racism and entitlement in even the most modern, luxurious settings. His unwavering stance, his dignity in the face of systemic injustice, and his readiness to hold those responsible accountable resonated with people from all walks of life. For the many elderly women who had seen both the triumphs and the tragedies of a long life, his story was a beacon of hope that justice, though sometimes delayed, could ultimately prevail. It was a reminder that even when the forces of discrimination seemed insurmountable, the strength of the human spirit, armed with truth and determination, could spark a revolution that would leave even the most hardened hearts in awe. In the grand tapestry of this unfolding drama, every whispered remark, every furtive camera flash, and every act of quiet defiance contributed to a narrative that was as riveting as it was heartbreaking. Darius Matthews had become more than just a victim of a single incident. He had transformed into a symbol of resistance, a living testament to the fact that when injustice is met with resolute dignity, the response can be nothing short of magnificent. The scales of retribution were beginning to tip, and those who had once wielded their power with reckless abandon were now facing the prospect of public accountability on a scale that left no room for compromise. As the days turned into weeks and the full weight of the scandal settled over Skylux Airlines, the legacy of that turbulent flight continued to grow. Darius Matthews, now supported by a legal team and bolstered by the outpouring of public sympathy, prepared to launch a legal and social campaign aimed at dismantling the discriminatory practices that had marred his experience. The case quickly evolved into a landmark moment in the fight against racial injustice, a call to action for every individual who had ever felt marginalized or oppressed. For those who had borne witness to his ordeal, whether through the viral videos circulating online or the heartfelt testimonials shared in community centers and local gatherings, the story of Darius Matthews became a rallying point. It was a narrative that transcended the confines of a single flight and spoke to the broader struggle for equality and human dignity in modern America. Women, many of whom had navigated decades of social change and were no strangers to the harsh realities of discrimination, found solace and empowerment in his steadfast resolve. They celebrated his courage, drawing inspiration from his example as they continued to advocate for a world where every person, regardless of the color of their skin or their socioeconomic status, was afforded the respect they deserved. In the end, what began as a routine flight on a luxury airline had transformed into an epic battle between the entrenched forces of prejudice and the indomitable spirit of a man who refused to be dehumanized. Darius Matthews, through his quiet strength and unwavering commitment to justice, had set in motion a series of events that would forever alter the landscape of corporate accountability and social justice. His journey from the confines of an unjust seating dispute to the forefront of a national movement served as a powerful reminder that even the smallest act of defiance, when fueled by truth and compassion, could spark a revolution capable of toppling long-held hierarchies. As the story of that day continued to spread, it carried with it a promise that no matter how deep the wounds of discrimination might be, the light of justice could still shine through. Darius Matthews' experience was a testament to the enduring power of the human spirit, a reminder that even in the face of overwhelming adversity, one can stand tall and demand the dignity that is every person's birthright. And as the nation watched, hearts stirred and voices raised. The call for accountability grew louder, echoing through boardrooms, courtrooms, and living rooms alike. For every woman who had ever felt the sting of injustice, for every soul who believed in the possibility of a fairer, kinder world, Darius's story was a beacon of hope, a vivid illustration that the fight against discrimination was not only necessary, but inevitable. His calm, measured defiance on that ill-fated flight had ignited a spark that would soon blaze into a movement, one that promised to overturn a system built on outdated notions of privilege and replace it with a new order defined by fairness, accountability, and respect. In the end, the once luxurious confines of Skylux Airlines became the stage for a drama that was as riveting as it was transformative. Darius Matthews, with his quiet dignity and unyielding resolve, had not only defended his own honor, but had also paved the way for a reckoning that would reverberate across the nation. His experience, marked by moments of both profound sorrow and breathtaking courage, left an indelible mark on the collective conscience. A mark that reminded everyone that even in the darkest moments, the quest for justice could yield a response so powerful that it left all who witnessed it in a state of awe and inspired hope for a better tomorrow. In a private airport lounge miles away from the chaos on the tarmac, Darius Matthews sat at the center of a rapidly assembling team. His COO, Elise Thompson, had arrived within 20 minutes of his urgent text message, flanked by their chief legal counsel and head of corporate communications. The communications director reported with mounting alarm that the viral video had already reached 2 million views, and Elise's eyes met Darius's with a look that spoke of years of shared struggle and mutual understanding. They both recognized the bitter irony of the situation. Their adversaries had unwittingly revealed their true colors, exposing a deep-seated culture of discrimination that would soon topple Skylux Airlines from within. Back at Skylux headquarters, the social media team was in full crisis mode. Multiple screens flashed the rapidly climbing view count as the hashtag #SkyluxDiscrimination trended nationally. The video had now passed 5 million views, and the atmosphere in the sleek corporate corridors was thick with dread. In a boardroom far removed from the public glare, CEO Richard Williams found himself surrounded by his executive team, their faces grim as they tried to assess the impending damage. An assistant interrupted the tense silence to announce that Darius Matthews was on the line and that Williams should speak with him directly. When Williams accepted the call on speakerphone, he was met with the calm, measured tone of Darius Matthews, whose voice carried the weight of the injustice he had suffered that very morning. "Mr. Williams, I appreciate your willingness to speak with me directly," Darius began, reminding everyone that Skylux Airlines shared a controlling stake with his tech company. It was clear now that the fate of the airline rested in his hands. The boardroom had become a hive of urgent activity. Board members, some still in golf attire and others having rushed from family events, huddled together with palpable tension. When Darius finally entered his office, every head in the room turned toward him. He carried himself with the quiet confidence of a man who had faced humiliation, yet refused to be broken. Wearing the same suit he had been forced to remove from the plane, a suit that now symbolized his defiance and resilience, he took his seat as Williams dimmed the lights and activated a massive screen at the front of the room. The viral video began to play, and every devastating moment was captured in crystal clear detail. The initial confrontation with condescending crew members, Trevor's smug tone, the weak justifications from the captain, and, most damning of all, the moment when Karen Whitfield slipped cash into Trevor's pocket while speaking about maintaining first-class standards. For 30 long seconds after the footage ended, the room remained silent, and several board members could not even bring themselves to meet Darius's steady gaze. Finally, Williams cleared his throat and spoke. "Mr. Matthews, we want to express our deepest apologies for the inexcusable treatment you experienced." "We are not interested in apologies." In a voice that was both calm and resolute, Darius interrupted. "Apologies are not enough. I have one demand and one decision. I am canceling the proposed contract between my company and Skylux Airlines." His words fell like a gavel in that tense room, leaving the executives scrambling as they realized that Darius Matthews now held the power to determine the airline's future. Williams tried to negotiate, suggesting that perhaps suspensions of the offending employees could suffice. He reminded Darius that some staff members had been with the company for many years and that union agreements were in place. If you pull your investment and cancel the $50 million modernization contract we were considering, 25% of our stock could be dumped on the market, and that would be catastrophic, Williams warned, his voice trembling with anxiety. As a young financial analyst rushed into the boardroom, tablet in hand, he announced breathlessly, "Sir, news of the incident is already affecting our stock price. We're down 12% and falling, with analysts predicting a 30% drop by closing if we don't take decisive action." Williams's eyes darted nervously between the tablet and Darius, whose calm determination seemed to silence every word of compromise. The gravity of the situation was unmistakable. If Darius Matthews chose to walk away from Skylux, every investor would follow, and the airline would face imminent bankruptcy. Meanwhile, back on the flight that had ignited the firestorm, Jessica, the flight attendant, and Captain Reynolds sat in uncomfortable silence, their earlier defiance and complacency now turned to bitter regret. Within minutes, the HR director arrived at Skylux's headquarters, accompanied by the company's legal counsel and 2 security officers, who positioned themselves discreetly by the door. Their presence signaled that this was no longer a routine matter of corporate damage control but a full-blown reckoning. Placing 3 identical folders on the conference table, the HR director announced in a steady, emotionless tone, "Your employment with Skylux Airlines is terminated, effective immediately." Jessica's hand flew to her mouth as she stifled a gasp, and Trevor's face contorted in shock as he muttered, "We are sorry. We were just following procedure." That passenger was being difficult and disrupting the boarding process. The HR director then opened her laptop and played the viral video for everyone in the room, the footage leaving no doubt about the crew's complicity. The recording showed not only the crew's condescending behavior and the captain's abdication of responsibility, but also the damning moment when Karen Whitfield handed money to Trevor as if it were a normal part of maintaining first-class standards. Jessica's voice broke as she admitted, "I knew it was wrong even as it was happening, but I didn't do anything to stop it." Captain Reynolds, whose experience had seen him through many storms, now appeared lost and defeated. The HR director continued, "You all have failed, not only Skylux Airlines but basic human decency. The passenger you removed was Darius Matthews, CEO of Right Tech Solutions and our largest individual shareholder." The truth struck like a second blow, and as the 3 employees were escorted out, receiving a final severance package of 2 weeks' pay that did little to ease their shame, the boardroom's tension deepened. Later that afternoon, in the main auditorium of Skylux headquarters, hundreds of employees gathered for an unprecedented announcement. CEO Richard Williams took the stage, flanked by Darius Matthews and his executive team. With a solemn tone that reverberated throughout the hushed room, Williams began, "Today, Skylux Airlines has failed one of our passengers in the most fundamental way." He explained that this failure was not an isolated incident, but symptomatic of systemic issues that demanded immediate and comprehensive change. He then gestured to Darius, who stepped forward and spoke directly to the gathered employees. "Every single one of you will undergo comprehensive bias training before returning to service," Darius declared. "This will not be a simple corporate checkbox exercise. We are suspending every flight, every route, and every service for 48 hours while our entire staff participates in this training program." Gasps rippled through the auditorium as employees absorbed the magnitude of the decision. A program that would cost the airline millions, but sent a powerful message that change was non-negotiable. Darius Matthews continued, his voice imbued with both personal pain and the weight of professional authority. "What happened today was not just wrong because I am a shareholder. It would have been equally wrong if I were a teacher, a doctor, or a student returning home. Every person deserves to be treated with dignity and respect." His words resonated deeply with the audience, especially with the seasoned women in the room, who had witnessed decades of injustice, yet still clung to the hope of a kinder world. As Skylux Airlines embarked on this comprehensive transformation, a dramatic shift in its 30-year history, conference rooms across the country were converted into training centers, and flight schedules were modified so that every employee, from baggage handlers to the CEO, would participate in the immersive program. Darius Matthews personally addressed many of these sessions, standing before rooms filled with skeptical, sometimes defensive employees. "What happened to me happens to people every day who do not have my resources or platform," he said. "Today we begin changing that." His passionate call for transformation put a human face on what might otherwise have been dismissed as a mere PR crisis, inspiring hope and determination among those who believed in true justice. Outside the corporate bubble, the consequences continued to unfold. The scandal had set in motion a chain reaction that reached far beyond Skylux Airlines. For every woman who had ever felt the sting of discrimination, Darius Matthews' steadfast stand against prejudice was a beacon of hope, a reminder that even the most powerful institutions could be forced to reckon with the truth. As the nation watched the dramatic turn of events, the story of Darius Matthews and Skylux Airlines began to redefine what accountability and redemption meant in modern America. In that moment, it was clear that justice, when pursued with unwavering determination, could transform even the darkest moments into a resounding victory for human dignity. In this digital age, accountability follows you everywhere, and for Darius Matthews, the powerful symbol of resilience and justice, the consequences for those who once abused their power were swift and uncompromising. Former crew members Trevor, Jessica, and Captain Reynolds soon discovered that their names and faces had become synonymous with discrimination in an industry where reputation is everything. Trevor found himself isolated in his small apartment, surrounded by rejection emails from various airlines. Every polite message stating simply that "we have decided to pursue other candidates at this time" masked the harsh truth that no one wanted to hire the man from that infamous viral video. The corporate language could not hide the reality of his downfall. A once respected employee, now shunned by an industry that could not forgive his complicity in a scandal of epic proportion. Jessica, who had served Skylux Airlines faithfully for 8 years, endured similar rejections. Each interview she attended was marred by a single question that pierced through any hope of a fresh start. "You're the flight attendant from that discrimination incident, aren't you?" a hiring manager would ask. And with that moment of recognition, the interview would abruptly end. The years of building her career were suddenly reduced to the humiliating memory of a moment when her silence had made her complicit, and her inability to stand up against the cruelty of the system left her with a reputation that barred her from returning to her former life in the skies. Even Captain Reynolds, a veteran with 30 years of flying experience and countless storms weathered, could not escape the fallout. His distinguished career was tarnished in the eyes of the industry. The man who once commanded respect in the cockpit was now finding himself unable to secure even entry-level positions within commercial aviation. That fateful incident, those few minutes of poor judgment when he failed to stand up for what was right, had reduced him from a figure of authority to a cautionary tale of a career cut short by a single moment of weakness. And then there was Karen Whitfield. Once the epitome of entitlement and privilege, her fall from grace was as swift as it was public. Skylux Airlines imposed a lifetime ban on her, and the consequences rippled far beyond her preferred carrier. Sitting alone in her luxurious living room, Karen watched news coverage of the incident with disbelief as national commentators dissected every detail of her company placed her on administrative leave pending an investigation, and former friends distanced themselves, unwilling to be associated with the woman who had come to be known across social media as Airline Karen. For the first time in her life, she was forced to confront the real impact of her arrogance. A stark, unrelenting reckoning that stripped away every veneer of superiority she had long enjoyed. Meanwhile, Skylux Airlines itself was undergoing a transformation that no one could have predicted. In the wake of the viral scandal, sweeping policy changes were implemented almost overnight. New guidelines established a zero-tolerance policy for discrimination, and the protocols for handling seating disputes were overhauled to ensure every passenger received the respect they deserved. The employee handbook was rewritten to explicitly state that accepting gifts or payments from passengers in exchange for preferential treatment was grounds for immediate termination. Passengers began noticing the change almost immediately. Interviews captured at boarding gates and baggage claims revealed that flight attendants were now far more attentive and professional, treating every customer with the same courtesy, regardless of appearance or status. One frequent flyer remarked, "I actually had a problem with my seat assignment once, but the way they handled it this time was completely professional. They found a solution that worked for everyone, and that's why I keep flying with them." In an almost miraculous turnaround, Skylux's stock began to recover as measurable changes were verified by independent auditors. The airline's hiring practices underwent a complete overhaul, with diversity initiatives that went far beyond mere numbers to address the very heart of inclusion and representation. It was as if the long-hidden toxicity of the company's culture had been exposed to the light of day and was finally beginning to heal. 6 months after the incident that nearly destroyed Skylux Airlines, the company was not only surviving but thriving. Passenger numbers had not just recovered, they had increased by 12%, and employee satisfaction scores soared to unprecedented levels. The transformation was real, and it was a testament to the power of accountability and change. Perhaps the most surprising development came on a rainy Tuesday morning when Darius Matthews, whose quiet defiance had sparked this entire revolution, announced a groundbreaking initiative through his foundation, the Second Chance program. Speaking at a press conference that was both somber and inspiring, Darius explained that accountability does not always mean permanent punishment. Accountability means earning your way back, he declared firmly. We cannot build a more just society if we don't create pathways for those who have acknowledged their mistakes and are willing to do the hard work to change. Among the first participants in this program were none other than Trevor, Jessica, and Captain Reynolds. The program required them to confront uncomfortable truths about themselves, to understand the far-reaching impact of their actions, not just on Darius, but on countless others who had been treated with similar disdain without the power to fight back. In group sessions, Trevor recounted the painful lessons he had learned growing up with inherited biases that, despite never being expressed in overt hatred, had led him to make choices that cost him everything. "I never saw myself as prejudiced," he admitted in one particularly powerful session. "I thought that because I didn't use slurs or explicitly hate anyone, I was one of the good ones. But this experience has shown me how bias operates even when we don't recognize it in ourselves." Jessica, on her part, focused on the theme of moral courage rather than self-esteem. "I knew what was happening was wrong," she confessed, tears welling in her eyes. "But I was afraid of losing my job if I challenged Trevor or the captain. Now I understand that my silence made me complicit." Captain Reynolds, the oldest and perhaps the most humbled of the trio, vowed that he would spend the rest of his career making things right. "Decades of believing I treated everyone fairly have been shattered by my failure that day," he said quietly, his voice laden with regret. "I will do everything in my power to ensure that no one else has to suffer as I did." With certificates from the Second Chance program in hand, Trevor and Jessica began to rebuild their lives. Trevor found a new calling in teaching others about the consequences of prejudice, dedicating his time to helping people understand that the mistakes of the past could serve as lessons for a better future. Jessica was the first to secure a new position, not as a flight attendant, but as a ground crew member at a regional carrier. Though the pay was less than half of what she had earned at Skylux and the work was physically demanding, it represented a second chance that she had once thought impossible. Skylux Airlines itself continued its remarkable transformation. Independent auditors confirmed that service experiences were now equal to or better than those experienced by white passengers, a milestone that had long been overlooked in the industry. In a private meeting at Skylux headquarters, Darius sat across from CEO Richard Williams, reviewing the 6-month progress report. "You have shown real change," Darius observed, his tone both measured and resolute. Williams nodded, the weight of the previous months evident in the new lines on his face. "This hasn't been easy," he admitted, "but it was necessary. What happened that day forced us to confront issues we'd been ignoring for years." Darius replied, "Sometimes justice isn't about punishment, it's about progress. Not through comfort, but through confrontation." The two men stood and shook hands, a silent acknowledgement that this transformation was not just a fleeting moment, but the beginning of a new standard for the entire industry. As the press continued to cover the sweeping changes at Skylux and the inspirational Second Chance program, the impact of Darius Matthews' courageous stand spread far beyond corporate boardrooms. Across the nation, the story resonated deeply, especially with those who had witnessed decades of injustice and longed for a fairer world. The fallout from that fateful day on the flight had become a catalyst for genuine change, one that reminded everyone that even in the darkest moments, the human spirit has the power to demand dignity and respect. And as the industry took its first tentative steps toward true inclusion and accountability, it was clear that sometimes the most spectacular form of retribution is not found in punitive measures alone, but in the transformative power of progress and redemption.